Hello my friends, I am Lux Noctis and today we're going to discuss exposition through animation. We'll take a look at a few of the different ways games use it and the impact it can have on the gameplay and storytelling. As always, there will be examples along the way, the first of which is the seemingly endless horror series Resident Evil. Resident Evil originally released in 1996 for the PlayStation, and was one of the forerunners that shaped the survival horror genre. It adopted a far slower pace than most games, and built suspense through the limitation of player resources, sparse sound design, resilient enemies, and expertly crafted labyrinthine locations. The older games are still beloved to this day, even if the series as a whole lost its way a long time ago. Now, when it comes to exposition, the face value story info came from some pretty terrible cutscenes, with the finer points of the plot being delivered through readable notes, diaries and the like that could be discovered throughout the various environments. So where does the animation come into it? Well, Resident Evil did something that was, as far as I'm aware, unique at the time. Upon taking a certain amount of damage, the player character's movement animation would change, and they would appear to be in an injured state. Take further damage and this walk cycle would change once more, meaning that the character you were playing as would desperately stagger around. This effect also came with reduced player movement speed, which was an excellent design choice as it leads to decreased mobility and, as a result, increased panic in the player. Here the exposition offered by the animations is purely related to gameplay, and isn't at all tied directly to the game's narrative. Someone who knows what they're doing can go through the entire thing without ever having to witness these injured states at all. What they do allow for in this case though, is Resident Evil's clean aesthetic. They give the person playing a frame of reference for the amount of health they have without there being any need for a HUD, which makes for a far more immersive and spooky experience. This means that when the player ends up in a sticky situation, they can immediately tell just how dire their circumstances are, and can react accordingly without necessarily needing to access the inventory screen. They still might, if they have healing items or wanted to check their ammo count, but in a worst case scenario where they're out of everything useful, it'll be an unbroken, stress-inducing hobble to safety. And for a horror game, that's a great thing. So here in this first example, the animations are adding to the realism, allowing for greater player empathy, and they're effectively relaying information without the need for any extraneous elements on the screen. It's a very effective utilization, and one that the RE games continued to use throughout the early years, right up until they made a shift and basically became straight action. Now though, we'll move on to something that uses animations in a way more directly tied to its story. Our next stop is another survival horror title, The Last of Us. Released in 2014, created by Naughty Dog, and met with a huge amount of critical praise, The Last of Us follows protagonists Joel and Ellie on their journey through a post-apocalyptic United States. The bulk of the game focuses on their attempts to reach the Fireflies, a rebel group who are rumoured to be close to finding a cure for the virus that has ravaged humanity, and they face countless hardships along the way. Here our attention is on the differentiation between the visuals when it comes to the two player characters. More specifically, we'll focus on enemy takedowns. First, take a look at Joel as he sneak attacks an enemy. The developer's attention to detail is evident throughout the game, so the disparity we'll observe here is no mistake. Joel appears to have little trouble taking down his target, especially when he has the element of surprise. The victim in this case is clearly overpowered, and generally speaking, when it comes to a fistfight, Joel also seems quite capable and will, for the most part, still have the upper hand. Now we'll move over to Ellie, who during the game's winter chapter is forced to fend for herself. This part of the game is, in my opinion, the best part of the whole experience, and the most important in terms of the story. It'll probably need a video of its own someday. For now though, we'll check out Ellie's takedown. When we contrast this with Joel's sneak attack, the differences are striking. First of all, Ellie has to use a knife in all close combat, because physically she cannot overwhelm her target like her older companion can. This is further driven home by the fact that she is literally pulled off of the ground by her enemy, and that her method of dispatching them, rather than being an almost clinical, controlled affair, is a brutal series of stabbing attacks. It all goes to show that whilst Ellie is smart and highly capable as an individual, she is still under-equipped to deal with the kind of ruthless, head-on violence that Joel often comes up against. Whilst the sneak attack is really no different when switching between the two characters, you still just creep up and hit a button after all, the way it's presented goes hand in hand with the narrative. Ellie's relative fragility is a key component of the Winter chapter. It's expressed through the gameplay, in the sense that if the player tries to take on an opponent head-on, they're going to sustain serious damage, if they manage to survive at all, and it's also displayed through those takedown animations. Without major spoilers, towards the chapter's close, this aspect of Winter's plot is put front and centre, when Ellie is forced to face an opponent who can easily overpower her, which leads to one of the most harrowing, impactful, and memorable scenes in the entire game. So now we've had an example where animation is giving us gameplay related info, and one where the visuals enhance the storytelling. Now we'll move on to a game where it does both. Shadow of the Colossus is something I've already talked about before on this channel, so I'll skip the preamble and get straight to the point this time. Link on screen for anyone interested in seeing the thing I made before about the game and its love story. Alright, let's get on with it. Shadow of the Colossus uses a physics-based animation system, one that allows the player character to react somewhat dynamically to other factors in the world, factors such as the creatures that are the size of buildings. Them simply taking a step can be enough to throw the player off balance or even take them completely off their feet. As protagonist Wanda clambers all over them trying to pinpoint their weak spots, they will shake violently in an effort to make him lose his grip, and compared to them, he's about the size of an insect. It all plays into one of the major themes of the story, the idea of facing impossible odds for the sake of someone you care about. It makes you feel small and outgunned, because these bosses are intimidating. Not only does it tie into the theme, but it creates a lot of the tension found in the gameplay. Tumbling down the back of a Colossus as your grip fails is a memorable experience, and it's even better if you manage to grab on at the last second, only to hold on for dear life as this giant being tries to shake you free. It goes even deeper than this though. One thing that struck me the first time I played the game, back when it came out, was just how clumsily Wanda handles his sword. It's only later on in the game that the reasons for this become more clear, but when you consider the fact that all of this stuff is intentional, you can learn something about Shadow of the Colossus's protagonist just from this alone. We can tell right from the beginning, if we pay attention, that Wanda is not a warrior. He isn't someone trained to use a sword at all. And this too goes hand in hand with the gameplay, because those haphazard swings are just as useless as they look. In fact, he only does any real damage with the sword when he uses it as though it were an oversized knife. This makes his chances of success even lower when it comes to his seemingly impossible task, which only reinforces his underdog status. So, what would drive him to risk everything despite the enormous risk? Well, that's what the other video was about, so maybe go take a look. The point is that some of the game's underlying narrative is given to us in this incredibly subtle way, and there's something elegant about saying so much about a character without ever really saying anything. I'm sure there are a ton of other examples much like the ones discussed here, but these three are the games that sprang to my mind. This was just a few of the ways in which animation has been used to greatly enrich them, and I think that if more attention was paid to the details in this regard, it would mean nothing but good things in terms of how designers convey story and game-related information to the player. Anyway, that's all for this week, people. I am Lux Noctis, and I sincerely hope you found this interesting. Catch you next time.